All right, this is Stuttering and Other Disorders of Fluency for the intro class. First, there are other types of disfluency besides stuttering. I'm going to emphasize primarily stuttering for the purposes of our class, though. But just so you're aware of the other types, there is acquired organic or neurologic stuttering, psychogenic stuttering, and cluttering. Beginning with stuttering, however, this usually begins in early childhood, and this is the most common type of disfluency. It's defined in the following manner. There is disruption in the fluency of verbal expression. There are involuntary audible or silent repetitions. Okay, so these are not purposefully executed by the person. The person cannot help it. It is audible. And in some cases there are some silent repetitions, which of course you can see on the person's lips as they're speaking. There can be prolongations, like there can be prolongations as an example of stuttering. And this can happen on syllables, words, or simply sounds. There can also be disruptions, which can occur frequently, and that can be, in a sense, an anticipation of a stuttering on the part of the person, so they simply stop speaking. And these are not readily controllable. There can also be accessory activities. I don't believe we saw any of those in the film, in the King's Speech, but there can be some eye blinking, there can be some head nodding, some shoulder jerking, all sorts of body accessory activities. And, well, I'll get into those later. But there is also an indication often of an emotional state associated with the stuttering. At one end of the continuum there is excitement, tension. At the other end there is fear, embarrassment, and irritation on the part of the person stuttering. It's true that the longer the stuttering persists, the more likely the associated emotional problems occur. And these can be felt by the family members too. They can be exacerbated by the family. They can be experienced by the family members as well. There can be aggressiveness, denial, anxiety, and timidness. All of these are possible manifestations of that emotion. We don't know what causes stuttering, and here is a pyramid that partially at least describes some of the phenomena associated with stuttering. Notice the emotions down there on the bottom and the accessory behaviors just above that. And toward the top of the pyramid are the disfluencies themselves, and of course the disfluencies themselves can seem like the biggest problem when in fact the emotions associated with it are often the biggest of the problems. That is to say, you can experience a lot of shame about the stuttering, and if you didn't experience that shame, the problem would not be quite the same issue. There wouldn't be quite the same power associated with it. Okay, the other sorts of disfluency, acquired disfluency, is pretty rare and usually associated with acquired brain trauma. There is not a past history of stuttering, nor is there a family history of stuttering. Psychogenic stuttering is even more rare than that, and is usually associated with a psychologically or emotionally traumatic experience. Cluttering. I have not seen a single case of stuttering in my career. It's that rare. It's less common than any of the other forms of disfluency. However, there is an impairment in formulating language that is almost always present when there is an instance of cluttering, a case of cluttering. It's characterized by rapid, dysrhythmic, sporadic, and unorganized speech. Okay, here we have a flowchart associated with stuttering. I can let you read through that here on the 10th slide. There are famous people who have experienced stuttering, including James Earl Jones. Here you can see on here Marilyn Monroe, Anthony Quinn, Carly Simon, James Stewart, Mel Tillis, my favorite, John Lee Hooker, and so on. I'll let you read down the rest, but there certainly are. I didn't realize myself that Tiger Woods was a stutterer, had a history of stuttering in his background. The question on this slide is, how should you respond when talking to a person who stutters? I don't have the answer. I have an answer to that, and one answer to that is ask the person who stutters. Another option is simply asking yourself how you would like to be responded to if you yourself stuttered. We can talk about this some more in class. There are some theories of causation, and none of which, by the way, has an uncontroversial. Let me put that in a positive way. Every one of these has some controversy associated with it. So let's go through these ever so briefly, because this is not, you're not all becoming speech therapists, and if you are, then you'll have a course in just this. The cerebral dominance theory suggested that a child is predisposed to stutter because neither side of the brain is dominant for talking. In the rest of us, the left side of our brain is usually dominant for talking. There are a few of us, a small minority of us, who have the right side of the brain dominant for talking. And the suggestion here is that in stutterers, neither side is particularly dominant. There is some recent PET scan evidence that suggests this might be the case, or there might be some merit to this, but not in all stutterers, which by itself is a problem for the theory. There have been biochemical and physiological theories. An inherited predisposition is often mentioned in this context. And it's hard to establish what is different in these folks compared to what is an actual act of stuttering. That is to say, what is different when the person is not stuttering compared to when the person is stuttering? If you compare that to somebody who doesn't stutter, it hasn't been entirely clear the differences there between stutterers who are in the moment not stuttering and people who don't stutter. A genetic theory does not have much credibility these days, simply because there are too many people who do not have any genetic history of stuttering in their family or ancestry. Neurolinguistic theories propose that there are really two components to this. A linguistic issue, including the paralinguistic system. We talked about the paralinguistic system earlier, plus time pressure. So those two things combined, that there is something in this person's linguistic system that is different, and there is time pressure. Diagnosogenic and semantogenic theory suggests that because the parents diagnose the stuttering and say, oh my gosh, you're stuttering, even if it's not quite that overt, that itself reinforces the stuttering and perpetuates it. This also is given very little credibility these days. It doesn't happen often enough. And there are people who respond in that manner to normal disfluency, and yet the person does not go on to stutter. More contemporary research has included some neuroimaging results that have proven quite interesting, not entirely conclusive, but at least quite interesting. Okay, now go on to part two, please.